We're here at the first ever Swedish Citizens Assembly on climate, and with me I have one of the experts who has been giving a talk to the members of the Citizens Assembly. Lisen Schultz, you're Deputy Director of Stockholm Resilience Centre, and you have worked a lot on educating union leaders and business leaders, and you talked about business and civil society engagement on climate. Why is this such an important topic?
Well, the private sector, of course, employs a lot of people, holds a lot of the economic resources and the competence needed in the shift towards a fossil-free society or a climate-neutral society. So I think it's important to understand their perspective on this transition. And then the other side of the coin, the union leaders, they are important because they represent 3.5 million Swedish people who are members of unions. And historically in Sweden, when we've had large transitions, unions and employers have come together to coordinate, to ensure that transitions happen, but also that they are just, that they become good for people. And so that when some jobs are left behind, the people are not left behind, but moved into the new jobs that emerge in the transition. So I think it's important for the Citizen Assembly to understand the perspective of business, the perspective of union leaders on the climate transition.
So this is the second day of the assembly. It started yesterday, and there's quite a lot of energy, a lot of engagement. I've been listening in, and you had a Q&A with some of the members of the Climate Assembly. How was that? What was raised? How did you experience that?
It's really exciting to meet sort of all of Sweden in one room, and also to see, the competence that is here. I had people in my group who have a background with union work, and someone engaged with forestry and so on. So I think a lot of expertise, good questions. There was a question around greenwashing. What do you do with companies who claim to be sustainable, and yet when you see their operations, it's really bad for the environment, we talked about the new EU directive on green claims that's coming. There was a question around the forest. How is that supposed to be enough for all of these roadmaps to a fossil-free, industry, if we need to replace all of the fossil fuel and the fossil materials with things from the forest? It's not going to last. If it's also going to be a carbon sink, how can we address that? And so on. So really interesting questions. And there was also an interesting idea that came up, or an experience from before, when we've seen public procurement have a really strong impact on innovation in business, because when the public sector asks, for, the best solution from a sustainability perspective, and promises to buy, that solution, you can see a lot of innovation happening in industry. And we've seen that, for example, when it comes to heating of households, back in the days when we shifted from oil heaters to pumps that are based on geothermal energy and air and so on, and where that was started because there was a public procurement on that, and now that has become a fantastic export success as well, when more and more parts of the world want to shift away from heating their houses with oil to a more sustainable alternative.
Is this a methodology that maybe the unions or the businesses in Sweden, for instance, could use to have these kinds of mini publics or assemblies to kind of work how they shift, or do you have any examples of this kind of democratic, open collaboration from the world you are working with?
Well, when it comes to unions, I think they are, experts in group work or democracy in general, because they are associations where they're really good at working together to get to shared standpoints that they can push for and so on. When it comes to companies, they're less used to that, but I think with climate ambition also comes the need for new partnerships. So when companies start looking at their emissions, they often find that most of their emissions are in what's called scope 3. So that's your suppliers and customers. And then you need to start working with your suppliers and customers to lower those emissions. So I think the climate challenge also forces us all to learn how to collaborate and learn from one another. When it comes to doing these mini publics, they hold a lot of framing conditions, and it's quite a large investment to do a correct mini public. So maybe doing a real mini public is not what they should do, because it's so costly. And if you do it wrong, you're not going to come to good recommendations. But still having deliberation and bringing in critical voices and different perspectives and so on, I think that's useful for everyone in this work.
I also wanted to ask you on your work on educating business leaders and union leaders. What are the impacts of this work? Is it too early to say, or what are you looking for?
We have seen some impacts. I mean, the reason we do it is it's a training program, so we want to increase their knowledge, and we cannot control what they do with that knowledge afterwards. But we still have seen already that many of the companies where the CEO have taken the program start setting science-based targets for emission reductions. They start collaborating around maybe more circularity. We also see opinion pieces being put out where lots of our alumni are signing, demanding more ambitious climate policy, because they, of course, realize that the private sector cannot do this just on their own. They need the support from policymakers to create a playing field where the sustainable alternative also becomes the profitable alternative, and where the unsustainable goods and services are forbidden, or at least highly taxed or something like that. So we see some effects. And I also hear from the sustainability managers in these companies that they have gotten a different CEO back, one who's more informed, who has their own compass when it comes to the sustainable transition, and therefore can create more mandate for the sustainability officer to implement some of the ideas that were maybe already bubbling in the company, because they start seeing sustainability as a key for really survival and thriving of the business itself. So it becomes more of the core strategy than something that you do on the side.
So it all connects, really. You have the public on the one side that this event is focused on, and we have the business sector on the other, and then of course overarching is policymaking, which will be the enabler of everything in the end. Any pro tip to the citizen assembly?
Well, I think it's about listening and speaking with being both authentic and empathetic to one another, and being creative and trying to really create something that everyone in this room can agree on, so that we can take on this challenge that is so massive and requires everyone's brains on the problem. So I think with the rules of the game and how this has been set up, I have high expectations for good policy recommendations, but also for a really good process of deliberation. I really believe in people's capacity to create something together.
So creativity and empathy, that's the same thing you'd want in a boardroom when they discuss climate, right?
Totally. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lisen.